The rain fell sideways across the city like silver knives. Somewhere deep beneath the streets, something very old was dying, and it had no intention of dying alone. Look down from above. A city drowning under a March rain, rooftops slick and black, a neon sign flickering red like a wound that won't close. The streets are empty. Only water, only dark. Now come lower. An alley, a chain-link fence, and beyond it, an abandoned tunnel where ancient stone steps descend into a darkness that has no business existing. From far below, a faint gold light bleeds upward. 1,000 candles no hand ever lit. Closer still, heavy boots pounding through the rain. The shriek of metal torn open, and a single breath, ragged, frightened, far too loud in the silent night. There is something in this girl's blood, and an entire court beneath the earth has just lifted its head and caught the scent. Della Hayes ran because running was the only thing she had left. Her shoes slapped wet pavement, her lungs burned. Behind her, 3 sets of footsteps. Heavy ones. Men's boots, the steel-toed kind, hitting the ground like they had all night, and she did not. Men who wanted money she didn't have, $10,000. That was the number. That was the weight her father had left her when he died. 6 cents in the ground now, and he hadn't left her a watch, or a letter, or even a goodbye, just a debt. And the kind of men who come to collect on it with their hands instead of a phone call. She cut down an alley off Pike Street. The rain came sideways now. Seattle in March did that. It spat at you, soaked you to the bone, and called it weather. Somewhere above the rooftops, a neon sign buzzed and flickered. Red and then dark, red and then dark, painting the wet brick the color of a wound. Della. One of them shouted her name like he knew her, like they were old friends catching up. We just want to talk. They never just wanted to talk. She knew that the way she knew her own name. The way she knew the inside of an empty refrigerator and the exact sound a landlord's fist made on a thin door. Some things you learn young, and you don't forget them. She hit a chain-link fence at the end of the alley, threw herself up it. The metal bit cold into her palms. She climbed anyway, tore her jacket on the top wire, and didn't stop to care. Dropped down the other side into a stretch of old rail yard nobody used anymore. Dead tracks. Rusted signals leaning at broken angles, weeds coming up between the ties like the earth was trying to take it all back. And at the far end, a mouth of black where a tunnel swallowed the line whole. The tunnel, she thought. They won't follow me into the dark. Except she was wrong about which dark she was running into. She ducked inside, pressed her back to cold stone, held her breath, pressed a hand over her own mouth to muffle the sound of her own gasping, which was the only sound in the world now. Too loud, a giveaway. She waited for the footsteps to fade. They did. She heard the men reach the fence, heard one of them swear, heard them argue in low voices about whether it was worth a torn suit and a sprained ankle to follow a broke girl into a rail yard at 1 in the morning. Heard them decide it wasn't. Heard them go, and she let out the breath she'd been holding. Slow, careful, alive, but the tunnel didn't end the way tunnels are supposed to end. It went down, not a slope, a stair. Carved, old. Stone steps worn smooth in the center the way only centuries of feet can wear stone. Her phone was dead in her pocket, of course it was. It was always dead. Charging cost electricity, and electricity cost money, so she couldn't see much. Just shapes. Just the suggestion of a descent that shouldn't be there. A subway tunnel doesn't have hand-carved stairs going down into nothing. A subway tunnel has concrete and greedy, and the smell of piss. This smelled like cold. Like deep cold. Like the inside of a cathedral in winter. Della told herself she'd go back. In a minute. Once she was sure the men were really gone. She just needed somewhere to breathe. Somewhere to sit and let her heart climb down out of her throat and let her hands stop shaking. So she went down, because the cold up top pulled at her. Because something underneath was warmer than the rain. Because she was 23 and exhausted and out of better ideas, and the truth was that anything down those stairs, felt less dangerous than the life waiting for her at the top of them. And because some part of her, the part her grandmother used to talk about, the part Della had spent her whole life pretending not to have felt something pulling at her from below. A thread, a whisper under the skin, a weight in the blood, like the moment before you fall asleep, when something in you tips toward the dark and goes willingly. She put one hand on the cold wall, and she went down. The stairs went on longer than they had any right to. 10 steps, 30, 50. She lost count. The air changed, got thicker, got warmer, which was wrong, which was impossible because everyone knows the deeper you go, the colder it gets. The light changed, too. There shouldn't have been any light at all down here, but there was. A faint gold glow, coming up from below, getting stronger with each step, until she rounded a final turn and the stairs ended in a hall, and Della stopped breathing. 1,000 candles, maybe more, floating. No strings, no holders, no wax dripping to any floor. Just flame, hanging in the air at every height like the dark itself had decided to glow. Walls of black stone polished to a wet shine, tapestries the color of dried blood, taller than houses, hanging from a ceiling so high she couldn't find it. And the smell of the place, incense and stone, and something underneath that, something old and sweet and faintly metallic that she would learn the name of soon enough. This was not a subway tunnel, this was a court. And the court was full of people who were not people. There were dozens of them, 100, maybe. Tall and pale, and dressed in clothes that belonged to no decade, she could name some of them in things that looked stitched 400 years ago, some of them in suits that cost more than she'd make in a lifetime, and they turned to look at her, all of them, at once. The way a field of grass turns in a wind, beautiful in a way that hurt the eyes. And every single one of them went still in the way a cat goes still. The total, coiled, patient stillness of a thing that has just spotted prey and is deciding, unhurried, exactly when to move. Okay, Della whispered to herself. To no one. Her voice was very small in that enormous room. Okay, this is bad. This is very. Cold hands grabbed her. She didn't even see them move. 1 second she stood at the top of the 3 steps that led down into the hall. The next, 2 of them had her arms, 1 on each side, and the strength in those hands was wrong. Inhuman. Like being held shut inside the door of a bank vault. She pulled. She might as well have pulled against the stone wall. They dragged her forward, past faces that watched her throat. Past mouths that parted, just slightly, showing the white tips of something underneath. Della had been afraid plenty of times in her life, afraid of her father's debts, afraid of the men in the rain 10 minutes ago. But this was a new kind of fear. No, not new, an old kind, the oldest kind, the kind written into the back of the human skull 100,000 years ago, when people were small and slow and soft, and the night outside the firelight was full of teeth. They hauled her the length of the hall, and at the far end they threw her down. She landed on her knees on cold marble, caught herself on her palms, looked up and forgot how to be afraid. Because fear needs room to live in, and there wasn't any room left. A throne, carved from a single block of obsidian, black and glassy and wide as a car, and on it a man, except man was the wrong word, and she knew it the second she saw him. He was tall, she could tell even seated. White hair past his shoulders, falling in waves like something poured rather than grown. A face sharp enough to cut glass-high cheekbones, a hard jaw, a mouth made for either cruelty or tenderness, and she could not tell which, and eyes the color of old wine, deep, dark, ancient. He didn't look 30. He didn't look any age at all. Age is a thing that happens to people who are moving through time. He looked like something time moved around, and he was dying. She could see it, even from her knees, even across the distance. Black veins spreading under his skin like cracks through fine porcelain, crawling up the side of his neck, webbing across the backs of his hands where they gripped the arms of the throne. His knuckles were white and trembling, and a thin sound was coming out of him. Not a groan. Worse, the sound of something enormous, trying very hard not to scream. For one strange moment, looking at him, Della forgot to be afraid for herself, and was afraid for him instead, which was, she would think later, exactly the kind of thing that had been ruining her life since the day she was born. The court erupted in whispers. They came from everywhere at once, low and overlapping, 100 voices in a dozen languages, and somehow she understood all of them, or maybe just the dread underneath all of them. He won't last the night, 300 years. And now, tonight, it takes him. The curse has reached his silence. A woman's voice, single, sharp. It cut through the whispers and killed them dead. She stepped out of the crowd at the foot of the throne, white hair braided into a crown around her head. A face beautiful and furious in exactly equal measure, the kind of beauty that has spent so long being feared it has forgotten how to be anything else. She wore black. She moved like a blade being drawn. And she looked at Della the way you look at a stain on something you love. You, she said. Human, what are you doing in this place? I got lost, Della said. Her voice came out wrong, too high. I was running, there were these men, and the tunnel went down, and I didn't. It does not matter. The woman had already turned away from her, dismissing her, done with her. She knelt at the foot of the throne and looked up at the dying king with something that, on that hard face, looked almost like grief. My lord, Aurelian, stay with us. The dawn is hours away yet. Stay. Aurelian, the name landed in Della's chest and stuck there like a hook. She didn't know why, she'd never heard it before. but it lodged itself somewhere behind her ribs and would not come loose. The king's eyes opened, and they weren't pale like the others. They were red. Deep, glowing crimson, like coals under a layer of ash, like something burning low and slow that had been burning a very long time. They moved across the hall, and they found Della, and they held her, pinned her, the way a hand pins a moth. "Brielle," he rasped. His voice was wrecked. Crushed velvet dragged slow across gravel. "Why? Is there a human?" "In my hall," she stumbled in. "My lord, an accident, a nothing. We'll dispose of no." He lifted one shaking hand a few inches off the arm of the throne. The effort of it showed in his whole body. "Bring her closer." Brielle's jaw tightened until Della could see the muscle jump in it. But she obeyed, a small gesture, and the cold hands hauled Della up off her knees and forward, until she stood at the very foot of the obsidian throne. Close enough now to see the black veins pulse under his skin in time with a failing heart. Close enough to smell him winter and old books, and underneath both of those, that sweet metallic something she'd caught at the top of the hall. She knew now what it was. It was blood. The whole place smelled, faintly, of blood. "You're dying," Della said. Because apparently her mouth had decided to keep working long after the rest of her had surrendered. Because in the worst moments of her life, some broken switch in her flipped. And instead of going quiet and small, she said the true thing out loud. It had gotten her in trouble her entire life. It got her in trouble now. The whole court drew breath, but the king. The king laughed bitter, broken, a wet, cracked sound, but a laugh. "Yes," he said, after 300 years. "The curse has finally found my heart." His crimson eyes moved over her face, slow, taking inventory, and of all the nights, in all those years, on this one a human girl walks into my court. The world has a sense of humor I have never once appreciated. "A curse," Della swallowed, like a witch's revenge, another voice, a man's. Older looking than most of the others, though she'd learned that looking older meant nothing here. His accent was heavy and slow, the consonants worn smooth like the stairs. He moved closer through the crowd, watchful, curious about her in a way that was somehow worse than the hunger on the other faces. 3 centuries passed. Our king ended the life of a witch's daughter, during the sundering, and the witch repaid him with this. He gestured at the dying figure on the throne, a slow death, each year a little weaker, each year a little less, until nothing remains but dust, and the memory of a king, the sundering, Della repeated. The word was cold in her mouth. "A war," the man said, "between our kind and theirs. Long before you were born, child. Long before your grandmother was born," and Della's whole body went cold for a reason that had nothing to do with the rain still dripping off her hair. Grandmother. Because her grandmother used to tell stories. Stories Della had filed away, somewhere around age 11, under the heading "Lonely Old Woman Talking to Herself." Stories about a bloodline. About a woman, generations back, way back at the root of the family tree, who could heal anything. Anything at all. With nothing but her own blood, Della had laughed at those stories. Out loud sometimes, which she still felt bad about. Had called her grandmother sweet and a little touched in the head, and had changed the subject as fast as she politely could. She wasn't laughing now. Aurelian had gone very still. The kind of still the whole court seemed to catch. A held breath passing from person to person, like a candle flame jumping from wick to wick. "Something changed," he murmured. His nostrils flared, his crimson eyes sharpened, the ash burning back off the coals. "Your blood. I can smell it from here. There is something in it. Something that should not be there." "Something old. She smells human," Brielle said flatly. "She is a frightened girl who took a wrong turn. Nothing more. My lord, you are dying. Do not waste your strength on." "No." His hand shot out. Faster than anything that sick had any right to move. Faster than Della could flinch. His long fingers closed around her wrist. Ice cold. A grip that could have shattered the bones in her arm without effort, but it didn't. It was gentle, almost reverent. The grip of a man touching something in a museum he's been told he can never touch. And then it happened. The black veins nearest his hand, the ones crawling up his forearm toward his elbow, they slowed. Their angry pulse softened, like a fire someone had just stepped on. Like a scream cut off mid-breath, he felt it. She saw the exact instant he felt it, saw it move across his ruined face like sunrise. His eyes went wide, his grip tightened, not painful, just sudden, just desperate. The grip of a man who has been falling for 300 years and has just, for the first time, felt something solid pass beneath his fingers. "What?" he breathed. "Are you?" "I don't know," Della said, honestly. "Because what else was there? I'm a barista. I work 3 jobs. I'm 4 days late on rent, and my phone's about to get shut off. I'm pretty sure I'm nobody. You are not nobody, the king said, and the certainty in it frightened her more than the teeth had. He pulled himself upright on the throne. It cost him everything. She watched it, watched the tremor run the length of his body, watched the black veins flare in protest, watched him win the war against his own dying flesh by sheer, ancient force of will. When he was done, he was breathing hard, which she hadn't known his kind did. Tell me about the old woman, he said. The grandmother. Tell me everything. Quickly. I do not have the luxury of slowness tonight, so she did. The words came out shaky and fast and tumbling over each other. About the stories told at a kitchen table over weak tea. About the bloodline her grandmothers went back hundreds of years. About a healer at the root of it whose blood, the old woman said, could mend anything that could be mended and a few things that couldn't. The White Witch, her grandmother had called her, with capital letters in her voice. The one at the very start of the family. The one all the rest of them came down from, thinned out and watered down across the generations, until you got to a girl pulling espresso shots in a coffee shop on Capitol Hill, who'd never healed anything in her life except maybe a coworker's bad mood. The hall went silent as she spoke. Total. Complete. The kind of silence 100 predators make when they all decide at the same instant to listen. A White Witch's line, Brielle whispered. And for the first time, the fury on her face cracked. And underneath the fury was something Della hadn't expected to find there. Hope. The kind a person doesn't want to feel. The kind that hurts worse than despair because it can be taken away. The natural counter. The one working in all the world that can undo a dark witch's working. It could break the curse. Aurelian's grip on Della's wrist trembled, and she understood it wasn't only the dying now. It was something else. 300 years. I have tried everything. Every witch who would speak to me. Every text in every dead language. Every ritual, every dark and desperate working. Every cure ever whispered to be a cure. Nothing has even slowed it. His eyes burned into her. And a human girl walks into my hall on the last night of my life. And the veins go quiet at her touch. He looked at her. And Della looked back. And underneath the beauty and the power and the 300 years of suffering, she saw something she recognized. Something she'd seen in her own bathroom mirror more mornings than she wanted to count. Tired, bone-tired. Not the tired of one bad night. The tired of carrying something far too heavy, far too long, completely alone, with no one coming to take even one corner of the weight. She knew that tired. She had been that tired since she was 9 years old. How much blood, Della heard herself say. The whole court rippled like wind across water. You don't understand what you're offering, Brielle said, rounding on her, sharp again. He would not take a polite sip from your finger, girl. He would drink, deeply, more than a taste, more perhaps, than your body can spare and still keep your heart beating. She held Della's eyes, and there was no cruelty in it, only a hard honesty that was somehow worse. Hear me. If your blood does nothing, you die for nothing. If your blood works, and the hunger takes him, and he cannot stop, you still die. Those are the odds. They are not kind odds. Look at them clearly before you speak again. And if I don't do it? Della asked. She made herself look at the throne, at the dying thing on it. What happens to him? He dies before dawn, Brielle said. Flat, final. By sunrise, the king of the western courts is a handful of ash and a name in a song. That is what happens. It is not your concern. You owe him nothing. You owe us less than nothing. Walk back up the stairs, and there it was. The door held open. The reasonable thing. The smart thing. The thing any sane person would do. Della stood there, soaked through, bleeding from where the fence wire had opened her forearm. A debt on her shoulders she could never pay, and dead men in her wake. And nothing waiting for her at the top of those stairs, but more rain and more running, and a life that had been slowly crushing her flat since before she could remember. And she thought about her father, who had never once deserved her care, who took and took and took and gave nothing back but excuses and apologies, and the occasional $20 bill that was really her own money returned, and who got her care anyway, every time. Right up until the very end, when she'd sat by a hospital bed, holding the hand of a man who'd never held hers when it mattered. That was just who she was. The kind of person who helps people who haven't earned it. Her one real talent, and her one real curse. I'll do it, she said. Aurelian's face shifted. Something crossed it she hadn't seen there yet, not relief. Oh, disbelief almost. You would give your blood, he said slowly, willingly, to a stranger, to a monster, knowing it may be the last thing you ever do. Everyone dies, Della said. She was going for brave. She landed somewhere closer to terrified. But she got the words out, and her voice only shook a little. At least this way it'd mean something. That's more than most people get. The king was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. You are either the bravest creature I have met in 700 years, he said. Or the most foolish. Why not both? Della said. And a ghost of something crossed his ruined face. The corner of his mouth pulled. It wasn't a smile. But it was the place a smile used to live. Why not both, he agreed. But Della wasn't finished. Because her whole life had taught her one thing, if it had taught her anything, and that thing was this. Nobody gives you anything for free. So the moment you have something they want, that is the only moment you will ever have to ask for something back. I have a condition, she said, his eyebrow lifted. The whole court seemed to lean in at once, a forest swaying. Apparently nobody in 300 years had given the dying king conditions. You bargain with me, Aurelian said. Now, with my heart turning to ash inside my chest, with sand running out beneath both our feet, now's the only time I've got any leverage, Della said. After, I'm just a girl who already gave you what you wanted. I'm broke, I'm not stupid. There's a difference. And that ghost smile flickered back, stronger this time. No, he said with something that was almost respect. You are not. There are men looking for me, Della said. Up there, in the rain, right now. Bad men. They want money I don't have, and they will never, ever stop, because that's the whole point of men like them. The stopping is the part they don't do. Her voice shook on the last words, and she didn't try to hide it. So if I'm going to lie down and let you maybe kill me, I want to know that if I live, I don't have to climb back up those stairs into the exact same nightmare I climbed down them to escape. I want protection, real protection. The kind that lasts. Aurelian studied her for a long moment, and Della felt it again, that disconcerting sense of being seen, not looked at, seen, read like a page held up to a light. Every fear, every threadbare hope, every long year of running, all of it in one slow crimson glance. If you survive this night, he said at last, no living thing will ever touch you again without my leave. You will have the protection of my entire line, of every vampire from the northern ice to the southern deserts, all of whom answer to me. I give you my word. A pause. The crimson eyes held hers, and my word has bought and held kingdoms for longer than your nation has existed. Della believed him. She didn't know why. She'd been lied to by experts her whole life. Her father had been a virtuoso of the broken promise, and she'd built up calluses against the feeling of being told something too good. But this slid past all of them. This she believed all the way down. Okay, she said, quietly. Then let's not waste your last night arguing. They moved. Two of them, the cold-handed ones, half carried her, because her legs had decided somewhere in the last few minutes to stop fully working. They went through the palace in a blur she could only catch in pieces. Halls that had no business existing this far underground. Ceilings that arched up and up into shadow she couldn't see the top of. Doorways framed in carved black stone. And portraits. Hundreds of them. Lining the corridors, pale face after pale face after pale face, stretching back across centuries of fashion, ruffs and powdered wigs and armor and silk. And Della understood, with a lurch in her stomach, that some of the people in those paintings were probably still walking around somewhere in this place. These weren't ancestors hung on a wall to be remembered. These were photo albums. These were last year's holiday snapshots. They reached a round chamber. The air in it was different, heavier, charged like the moment before lightning. Symbols had been carved into the curved walls, symbols that hurt to look at directly, that slid sideways out of her vision when she tried to focus on them, that her eyes refused to hold the way a magnet refuses the wrong pole. At the center stood a stone altar, long and low and waist-high, and candles floated around it, dozens of them, untroubled by gravity, casting moving gold light across the unholdable symbols. Real magic. Not card tricks. Not mirrors and misdirection. The real, old, dangerous thing. The thing the human race had spent 10,000 years building churches against. And she was about to lie down in the middle of it. You'll lie on the altar, Brielle instructed. She was already moving around it, drawing fresh symbols on the stone floor in something dark and thick that Della very deliberately did not look at too closely or ask about. He'll drink from your throat. It's the fastest way, and speed matters tonight more than your comfort. If the curse reaches his heart completely before your blood takes hold, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. The dust on the throne would have finished for her. Then Aurelian removed his shirt, and even dying, even cracked through with black, even with that terrible web of curse spreading out from over his heart, there was no mistaking what he was. Carved, lean, made of something far closer to marble than to flesh. The veins spread from a point on his chest in a dark branching sprawl, like a tree of ink growing under the skin, and as she watched, they pulsed faster, hungrier, climbing. She watched him sway, watched him plant his feet and refuse to fall. He turned to her, and in that turning, the king fell away. And underneath the king was just a man. A frightened one. "I'll try to be gentle," he said, "but I cannot promise it. The hunger of my kind is a hard thing to govern at the best of times, and tonight is not the best of times. If your blood is truly the cure, it will sing to me when it touches my tongue. It will be the most beautiful thing I have ever tasted, and I have tasted a great deal. You may have to push me away." "And how?" Della said, climbing slowly up to sit on the cold edge of the altar. "Exactly. Am I supposed to push away a 700-year-old vampire king?" The ghost smile again. Sadder this time. "You won't be able to." "Oh, great. Wonderful. Love that for me. Really putting my mind at ease here." He turned to Brielle. "If I cannot stop you, pull me off her. By force. Even if I fight you. Even if I command you not to. Do you understand me, old friend? Even if I order you with my dying voice to let me finish. You ignore it." Brielle's face was carved from grief and stone. "We'll do what's necessary," she said. "For both of you." And Della heard the second half she didn't say, that if it came to a choice, Brielle already knew which life she'd spend. Della lay back. The stone was cold and hard through her wet clothes, leaching the last of her warmth. She looked up at the floating candles, watched them drift, tried to slow the animal slam of her heart and could not. She thought, absurdly, that she'd never told anyone where she was going tonight. That if this killed her, no one would ever know. No one would even look. There was no one left to look. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it settled over her like a strange, cold peace. Nobody waiting, nobody to disappoint. Nothing to lose but a life that had been losing her anyway. Aurelian leaned over her. His white hair fell around them both like a curtain, closing out the chamber and the symbols and the watching faces, until there was nothing in the whole world but him and her and the small warm space between them. This close she could see the flecks of silver scattered through the deep red of his eyes, like stars in a wine-dark sky. His hand came up, cupped her face. His thumb moved across her cheekbone, slow, with a tenderness that had no business in a room like this, at a moment like this. "Thank you," he whispered. "Whatever happens after this, however it ends. Thank you for your courage. I will carry it with me, into whatever comes." Then his head dipped. His lips touched her throat, soft, almost a kiss. His breath was cool against her skin, and she felt her own pulse leap up, treacherous to meet it. The first bite was pain, bright, sharp. A clean white line of it, there and gone. She gasped, her whole body arching up off the stone. And then, warmth. It flooded out from the wound, spreading down her chest, her arms, her belly, her legs, a strange tidal heat that was not quite pleasure, and was no longer pain, and was simply overwhelmingly intense. She felt him drinking, felt the pull of it, felt her own blood leaving her body in slow, strong drafts. And distantly, very distantly, some small, sensible voice in the back of her skull observed, with mild alarm, that she should probably be terrified. But the warmth kept spreading, and the terror never came, and then. The cord. That was the only word she ever found for it, the only one that came close. A line. A thread. A cable of something strung suddenly taut between her chest and his, humming, alive. And through it, something began to pour back the other way. Not blood, not warmth. Him. His whole self flooding into her down the cord, and she had no defense against it, no wall to hold it back, and so it came in. She felt his pain. All 300 years of it, at once, compressed and total. Crushing. Constant. A weight she could not have carried for 3 days, let alone 3 centuries. And underneath the pain, she felt his loneliness, and his was a specific, particular loneliness. The loneliness of a man who has stood still while the whole world flows past and dies. He had watched every human he ever loved grow old and wither and turn to dust while he stayed exactly as he was. He had done it so many times that he had stopped letting himself love humans at all, because love, for him, was just grief with a longer fuse. She felt all of that in a single heartbeat. And underneath even that, the deepest thing, the bedrock, she felt his fear. Not of dying. He was long past fearing his own death. In some ways, he'd been courting it for a century. His fear was for his people. Of leaving them unguarded in a dangerous world. Of failing, in the very last moment, the one duty he'd carried alone for 300 years. And underneath all of it, threaded through everything else. She felt him start to heal. Her blood was working. She could feel it happening. Feel the curse coming apart like a knot worked loose. Like a fist finally opening after 300 years clenched shut. Like ice breaking up on a river in spring. It was the single most extraordinary thing she had ever felt. She was saving him. The broke barista, the nobody. She was undoing 3 centuries of a master witch's hatred with the blood in her own ordinary veins. But he wasn't stopping. The warmth began to thin at the edges. Cold crept in to replace it, lapping inward, claiming her fingers, her toes, the crown of her head. Her vision blurred and dimmed at the corners. She tried to lift her arms, to push against the hard marble of his shoulders. They wouldn't lift. They lay at her sides like things that belonged to someone else. Heavy as the stone beneath her. "Aurelian," she whispered. It came out as barely a breath, less than a word. He didn't answer. He couldn't hear her. He was somewhere else now, somewhere far down, drowning. His arms wrapped around her and gathered her up off the altar and held her tight against him as he drank. And through the cord, she felt it clearly, terribly, that it wasn't cruelty. It wasn't malice. There was no monster in it at all. It was need. The bottomless, blind, drowning need of a creature that has been starving for 300 years and has finally, after all that time, found the thing that ends the hunger. And cannot make itself let go. Her heartbeat slowed. Each beat softer than the one before, more distant, like footsteps walking away down a long hall. "Brielle," someone shouted, far off, alarmed. The first crack of panic she'd heard from any of them. Hands grabbed at him, many hands. She felt the impact through his body. Heard snarling his or theirs, she couldn't tell. Heard something heavy crash and shatter against stone. The candles guttered wildly. It all came to her from very far away, down a tunnel that was getting longer with every fading beat of her heart. And she found she didn't mind, found it was almost peaceful. This slow drift down and away from a life that had never been very kind to her, and then the cord flared. Not her doing. She felt his mind slam back into itself like a door blown open, felt his horror at what he was doing land on him like a falling building, all at once, total. He wrenched himself away from her throat so hard and so fast that he staggered back off the altar and nearly fell, catching himself against the chamber wall. His mouth was red with her. Her blood on his lips, his chin. And his eyes were wild and wide and flooded with a terror that looked obscene on a face that old, on a face that had seen everything the world had to offer twice over. "No," he breathed. No, Della couldn't answer him. The world was a slow gray spin now, cold and heavy, the candlelight receding to pinpricks. Someone's hands pressed something to her throat, hard. Brielle's, maybe. Voices shouted over her, around her, a great distance up. Like she'd fallen down a well, and they were all leaning over the rim. The last thing she saw was his face above hers. Those crimson eyes, the wildness gone out of them now, flooded instead with an anguish so vast it looked like it could swallow the whole hall, the whole palace, the whole world. "Stay with me," he commanded. And even wrecked, even drenched in terror and her blood, his voice carried all 700 of his years inside it, the voice of something that had given commands to armies. "You offered your blood willingly, you saved me. And now I am ordering you, do you hear me? I am ordering you to stay alive. Stay. Stay." But she couldn't obey. The dark came up to meet her, and after a life spent fighting for every single inch, she found she didn't have one more left in her. So she stopped fighting, and she let it take her down. She woke to softness. That was the first thought, complete and clear before anything else. Soft, softer than anything she had ever in her life owned or slept on or touched. The second thought arrived a beat behind it, and it was far more surprising than the first. She was alive. Della opened her eyes. The room was beautiful in a way that didn't seem like it should be allowed. A vaulted stone ceiling, painted with a field of stars that seemed to shift and wheel slowly when she looked straight up at them. Tapestries on every wall, deep blues and silvers, candlelight, warm and everywhere, and sourceless because, of course, there was no electricity 100 feet underground. There were only these endless candles that no one ever seemed to light. And the bed. The bed was the size of her old apartment, draped and piled in midnight blue silk that her body had sunk into like a stone into deep water. Her clothes were different. Someone had taken away her wet, torn, ruined things and dressed her in something soft and clean and far too fine for her. She lifted one hand, it took effort. Her whole body felt scraped hollow and touched her own throat, and felt bandages, wound neat and snug around it. "You're awake." She turned her head too fast and the room swung. Cold hands caught her shoulders before she could list sideways, steadied her with terrible, gentle strength. And she found herself looking up into the face of Aurelian. He looked different. The black veins were gone, all of them, completely. His skin was flawless, unbroken, pale as candlelight. His crimson eyes were brighter than before, the coals fanned to flame, alive in a way they hadn't been on the throne. and the way he was looking at her like she was something precious and impossibly fragile that he had very nearly broken with his own hands, and could not quite believe was still whole. "How long?" she rasped. Her throat was raw inside and out. 3 days, he said. His hands stayed on her shoulders, gentle but firm, as if he was afraid that the moment he let go she might dissolve back into the dark she'd nearly gone into. "Your heart stopped, twice. Aldous worked over you for most of the first night. Were it not for him, you would not have come back to me at all." He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, the guilt in them was a physical weight. "I almost killed you. I held you in my arms, and I drank your life, and I could not make myself stop. After 700 years of control." But you didn't," Della said. Her voice came out rough but certain. "Kill me. I'm here. I'm talking. And you." She made herself focus on him. "Really look. You're healed. It's gone. The curse is gone." "Yes." He opened his eyes. "Your blood broke a working I had believed, for 300 years, to be unbreakable. You did in one night what I could not do in 3 centuries of trying." His jaw tightened. "You saved my life, my sanity, my people, and I repaid you by nearly tearing your throat out on a cold stone altar. That is the whole of what I am, Della Hayes. Remember it. However gentle I may seem, that is what lives underneath, and there was so much old self-hatred packed into those last words that Della did the only thing her scraped hollow body had strength enough to do. She lifted her hand and laid it over one of his. "I offered," she reminded him, quiet, willingly. "You told me the risk and I lay down anyway. So stop. You don't get to carry this one alone. I won't let you. I'm in it too." He stared at her hand on his, as if no one had touched him kindly in a very, very long time. And maybe, she thought, looking at 300 years of grief in a young man's face, no one had. He let her keep her hand on his. That was the thing she noticed, lying there in the midnight silk, with her body scraped down to nothing. He didn't pull away. A creature 700 years old, who had commanded armies and buried empires, who had just confessed that the worst thing in him lived an inch under the surface, and he let a broke barista's bandaged hand rest on the back of his, and he didn't move it, and his thumb began, slowly, to trace a small circle against her shoulder. Unconscious, she thought. He doesn't even know he's doing it. Which was its own kind of heartbreaking. Because it meant his body remembered how to be gentle even when his mind had spent 3 centuries forgetting. "That thread," she said. Her voice still came out like sandpaper, the cord. It's still there. I can feel you, right now. Sitting at the edge of my head like a second pulse that isn't mine." His circling thumb went still. "A blood bond," he said. His jaw tightened. "When your heart stopped on the altar, I gave you my own blood to call you back. It is the only thing that would have worked. It saved your life," a pause, "and it tied us together. Permanently. I did not have the time to ask, and I would not have had the right to ask even with all the time in the world, but it was that or watch you die in my arms. So I chose, for both of us. Without your leave." "What does it mean?" Della asked. "The bond. What does it actually do? You will feel me?" He said simply. "Where I am, whether I am near or far, whether I am calm or in a rage, and most of all whether I am in danger and whether you are. The bond runs toward fear like water runs downhill. If you are ever truly afraid, anywhere in this world, I will feel it. And I will come." Della turned that over in the candlelight. She should be angry. That was the correct response, surely. Some ancient stranger had reached into her chest while her heart was stopped and tied a knot in her soul without asking, and now he lived in the back of her skull, rent-free, forever. A violation, an invasion. By every reasonable measure she'd been used except. She thought about her apartment, the cheap one. The thin walls and the broken buzzer and the way she'd lay awake so many nights, listening to the building settle and knowing, with absolute certainty, that if she screamed, no one would come. That she could die in that room and the first anyone would know of it would be the smell. 2 weeks later. She had spent her entire adult life as a person no one would come for. And now there was a thread in her chest that meant someone always would. "Huh," she said. Aurelian frowned. "Huh? That's it. That's the whole reaction. Huh." She let her head sink back into the pillows. "I keep waiting to feel violated, and instead I just feel found. Which probably says something deeply concerning about my life up to this point. But I'm too tired to unpack it." She closed her eyes. "We can both pretend I had a more dignified response." The corner of his pout mouth moved. The ghost smile. She was learning to spot it. "Tell me about the curse," she said, eyes still closed. "The whole thing. You keep handing it to me in pieces. A witch. Her daughter. A war I've never heard of. Give me the actual shape of it." "I've earned the shape of it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he moved, settling onto the edge of the great bed, his weight barely creasing the silk. His hand stayed in hers. Neither of them remarked on it. It had simply, somewhere in the last few minutes, become a thing that was true. Her name was Vasilka Dran, he said. During the sundering the war between my kind and the witches, 300 years ago, when the old powers nearly ended one another and dragged half of Europe down with them, I killed her daughter. Aurelian, wait. Hear the whole shape since you asked for it. His eyes had gone distant, looking at something 3 centuries behind him. I did not kill the girl in cold blood. She had slaughtered an entire household of my people. A minor house, not warriors. There were children among the dead, Della, young ones. She walked through that house with fire and left nothing behind that could be buried whole. By our law, and by any law a reasonable creature would recognize, she had earned her execution 100 times over. He looked down at their joined hands. But Vasilka was her mother. And a mother does not weigh her child on the scales of reasonable law. She weighed her child against the whole world, and the world came up short, and the one who had taken her child was me. So she took 300 years from me in return. One slow, screaming piece at a time. That's monstrous, Della whispered. I killed her daughter, Aurelian said, plainly, without flinching. To her, I was the monster, and she was not entirely wrong to think so. He raised his eyes to Della's, and the weight in them was the accumulated weight of centuries. There is always another side to it. Always. I have lived long enough to learn that much, if I have learned nothing else. Every villain is the hero of the story they tell themselves in the dark. Even me. Even her. But you fought it, Della said. For 300 years. You didn't just lie down? I am not in the habit of lying down. A dry flicker of humor. Every witch who would take my coin or my threat. Every grimoire I could buy or steal or pry from the dead hands of those who would not sell. Every blood ritual. Every dark and desperate working that some hollow-eyed practitioner swore might be the cure. The humor went out of him. Most witches would not help at any price. I led the armies of my kind through the sundering. My name is not a beloved one in their houses. Mothers there frighten their children with it still, and the few who did try for gold or curiosity all came in the end to the same conclusion that I came to. Vasilka Dranchen was among the most powerful of her entire generation. Her curse was not a spell. It was a masterwork, the finest thing she ever made. And it could not be unmade, except it could, Della said softly. It just took the right blood, it took you, he said. And the way he said it like the word you was a complete sentence, a whole argument. A closed case sent heat climbing up the side of her neck that had nothing to do with blood loss. She got better slowly. That was the rhythm of the days that followed. If you could call them days, there was no sun down here to count them by. Only the endless candles and the slow tidal habits of a court that had stopped measuring time in human-sized amounts centuries ago. But Della's body kept its own clock, and by that clock she healed, unevenly, in fits and starts. The one who tended her was Aldous. He was the old vampire from the throne room, the one with the heavy Russian accent, worn smooth as river stone, the one who'd been a physician 200 years ago when his heart still beat. He came to her chambers once a day, sometimes twice, with a leather case of instruments that belonged in a museum and a manner that was gruff right up until the moment it wasn't. Sit, he told her the first time, and unwound the bandage from her throat with hands that were impossibly old and impossibly steady. He made a low sound at what he found. The marks. They will not fully fade, you understand. A bite from one as old as the king, it leaves a thing behind. In the skin, he tapped his own chest over the silent place where a heart used to be, and underneath the skin also. You will carry them. Both kinds. This is normal. Do not be afraid of it. Della touched the scars when he was done. 2 of them. Silver pale, slightly raised, neat as punctuation. They didn't hurt. But she was aware of them always now, the way you're aware of a ring you've worn so long your finger has shaped itself around it. A permanent reminder of a cold altar and the night she'd given a stranger everything she had and lived, barely to wonder why. You don't approve of me, she said to Aldous on maybe the 4th visit. Of what I did. I can tell. The old vampire's hands didn't pause in their work. I do not approve of foolishness, he said, and what you did was foolish. To die for a stranger. To open your throat for a thing that could not promise to stop drinking. He set down his instrument, looked at her with eyes the faded gray of old ice. But I have been a physician, in one form or another, for 200 years. And in 200 years I have learned that there is a kind of foolishness that is the only thing standing between this world and the dark. People who give what they cannot spare to those who have not earned it. A long pause. My wife was such a fool. Before I was turned. Before all of this. She would have liked you, I think. This is the highest thing I know how to say about a person. Now hold still. You are bleeding through the dressing again, you reckless girl. And Della, absurdly, felt her eyes sting. Because no one had spoken to her like that in years. Like she was worth scolding, worth worrying over, worth keeping alive. Her strength came back. With it came restlessness. She began to walk the palace, slowly at first, leaning on walls, then steadier, then with something almost like ease. She learned its geography, the great hall with its floating candles and its blood-dark tapestries, the judgment chamber, austere and cold, the library, which made her actually gasp the first time she saw it, a cavern of books. Some so old the pages whispered and crackled if you breathed too near them, ladders running up into shadow, shelves she couldn't see the tops of. The practice yards far below, where she'd hear the ring of steel at all hours. The kitchens, which existed, oddly, and produced human food for the rare human guest, and where Della took to sitting because the warmth and the ordinariness of it steadied her. And everywhere she went, she felt him. The cord ran through everything now, a low constant hum at the edge of her awareness. She could tell when Aurelian was in the library and when he'd gone to the judgment chamber. She could tell without seeing his face when something irritated him in council and when something amused him. Once, walking past his study, she felt a spike of grief so sudden and sharp. She stopped in the corridor with her hand pressed to her own chest, and she didn't go in, because some grief is private, even from the person living in your blood. He came to her too, often. More often, she suspected, than a king of the Western court strictly had time for. He would appear in the library doorway while she read, and lean there, and watch her with those crimson eyes, and when she looked up, he'd pretend he'd only just arrived. He would find her in the kitchens and sit across the scarred wooden table and ask her questions about the world above real questions, curious ones, about phones and coffee, and what people argued about now, and whether the rain in Seattle was as bad as he remembered it being 200 years ago. He listened to her answers like they mattered. Like she mattered. It was, Della thought, going to ruin her completely. She could feel it happening, and she couldn't stop it, and she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to. You stare, she told him one night in the kitchen, not looking up from the cup of tea someone had made her. It's rude. 700 years and nobody taught you it's rude to stare? They taught me, Aurelian said. I have simply outlived all of them, and with them, the obligation to care. That's a terrible attitude. It is one of the great freedoms of age, a pause. I stare because I am trying to understand you. You unsettle me, Della Hayes. You have unsettled me since the moment you fell down my stairs. I have known a great many humans. I have loved a few. I have never met one who walked into a hall full of predators, looked at the dying monster on the throne, and felt sorry for him. I didn't feel sorry for you. She finally looked up. I felt sorry for how tired you were. There's a difference. Pity looks down. I was looking across. He went very still. And Della realized, too late, that she'd said something more true than she'd meant to, that the cord had carried it straight through, undefended, into the middle of him. Yes, he said after a long moment, very quietly. There is a difference. I had forgotten there was anyone left alive who knew it. They brought Cole Briggs to the judgment chamber on the 4th day after she could walk on her own. Brielle had found him. Of course she had. Della had watched her go a flicker of black and white hair, a smile with too many teeth in it, gone up the long stairs into the rain. And 2 nights later she was back, and behind her, dragged between 2 younger vampires, was the man who had haunted Della's nightmares for 6 months. Della almost didn't recognize him. Up in the world, Cole Briggs had been a giant, a shadow that filled a doorway, a voice on the phone, calm and pleasant and absolutely without mercy, that had turned her stomach to cold water every time it said her name. He had been the shape of her fear made flesh. Down here, on his knees on cold black stone, 2 ancient predators holding him by the shoulders like he weighed nothing, he was just a man. Middle-aged, soft in the gut, sweating through an expensive shirt. His eyes darted around a room full of things that should not exist, and his mouth worked, and no sound came out. And Della, standing at the side of the chamber where Aurelian had asked her to stand, felt something she had not expected to feel. Not pity. She checked. There was no pity in her. 6 months of terror had burned that out, but not triumph either. Something quieter and stranger sat in its place. The flat, almost mournful feeling of watching a monster from your nightmares step into the light and turn out to be small. To have always been small. To have only ever been large because you were on your knees looking up. Aurelian sat the simple throne. The austere one. He wore black, and his white hair was bound back, and he looked nothing at all like the gentle creature who sat across kitchen tables asking about telephones. He looked like a verdict. Cole Briggs, he said. His voice filled the chamber without effort. Easy, unhurried. The voice of a man with all the time in the world, addressing a man with almost none. You are accused of threatening one under my protection, of pursuing a debt that is not rightfully yours, of causing harm through fear, which is the coward's harm, and the one I find I have the least patience for. How do you answer? I don't. Cole's voice cracked clean down the middle. I don't know what this is. I don't know who you people are. There's been a mistake. There's been some kind of... The woman to my left, Aurelian did not gesture. He simply looked, and the whole room's attention swung to Della like a compass needle. Della Hayes. You hunted her through the streets, for a debt that died and was buried with her father 6 months ago. Look at her. Tell her there has been a mistake. Cole's eyes found Della, and widened, and she watched the recognition land, and behind it, the calculation, the reflexive, animal calculation of a man who has talked his way out of every room he's ever been trapped in. Look, he said, turning the soft voice on, the reasonable one, the one from the phone. It's just business, you understand. It's not personal. It's never personal, it's just... She is under my protection, Aurelian said, and the temperature in the chamber actually dropped, the candle flames pulling low and blue, which makes any threat against her a threat against me. Do you understand, now, what it is you have done? Do you understand whose attention you have purchased, with your business that is never personal? Cole's face went the gray-white of old paper. Whatever animal part of him had been doing the calculating had just finished, and arrived at the only possible answer and shut down entirely. Oh God. Oh Jesus. Yes, Aurelian agreed pleasantly. We are, and here was the part Della had braced herself for through 3 sleepless candlelit, not quite nights. The part where she found out what she'd actually signed on to. The mercy, or the absence of it. She had told herself she could watch. She was no longer certain that was true. Aurelian rose. Came down from the simple throne with that liquid, unhurried grace that no living thing should possess. Crouched in front of the kneeling man until they were eye to eye, the ancient and the lone shark, the predator and the thing that had spent its small life pretending to be one. You have a choice, Aurelian said, almost kindly, choice the first. You forget that Della Hayes exists. You burn her debt to ash. You never speak her name, never seek her face, never let her cross even the back of your mind again. And in exchange for this, you walk back up my stairs into your reign, alive with your blood still inside you, which is more than you have earned, but which I am inclined tonight to grant, and the second choice, Cole whispered. What's the second choice? There is no second choice, Aurelian said. The ghost smile. The one Della knew. It looked very different on him here. That was a figure of speech. There is only the first choice. You are simply going to take it. He placed one hand on Cole Briggs's forehead, and Della felt it through the cord. A surge of power, old and dark and absolute, rolling out of him like heat from an opened furnace. Every candle in the chamber leaned sideways at once, all in the same direction, as if a wind had passed that she could not feel. You will forget, Aurelian murmured, and his voice doubled somehow, layered, an echo riding underneath the words. The debt is gone. It was always gone. Della Hayes is gone. She was never real. You have no interest in her, no memory of her. No. Cole Briggs's eyes went glassy, empty, smooth as poured glass, and then they snapped back sharp, aware, and confused in a way that had nothing whatsoever to do with the compulsion that had just rolled over him like a tide and found nothing to hold on to. What? Cole shook his head hard, like a man surfacing from cold water. What did you just do? What was get out? Get out of my head. Get out of my... Aurelian went very still, and Della felt the stillness through the cord a full second before she saw it arrive on his face. It was not a stillness she had felt from him before, not anger, not the cold settling of judgment. It was surprise, the pure, rare, profound surprise of a creature so old that almost nothing in the world can surprise it anymore, and which has just been surprised anyway. He took his hand from the man's forehead, slowly, looked down at him the way a locksmith looks at a lock that should have opened to the right key and instead held shut. Fascinating, he said softly. What's wrong? Della took a step forward before she'd decided to. Aurelian? What happened? What did you feel? He didn't answer her right away. He rose to his full height and stood looking down at Cole Briggs. who was blinking and shuddering and pressing the heels of both hands against his temples like a man with the worst headache of his life, which, Della supposed, in a sense he was. A human mind cannot resist me, Aurelian said. His voice had gone quiet and careful, the voice of a man thinking out loud and not liking the shape of his own thoughts. Hear me clearly, because this is not a small thing. In 700 years, not once, not a single time has a human mind refused my compulsion. They forget what I tell them to forget. They remember what I permit them to remember. Their minds are open doors to me, and I walk through as I please. He paused. This one did not forget. I pushed with the full weight of what I am, and his mind did not open. It was held shut from the inside. By something I did not put there, Della's stomach dropped through the cold stone floor. Which means, she said, which means someone protected him. Aurelian's crimson eyes lifted from the trembling man and found her across the chamber, and there was a new weight in them. Someone shielded this man's mind against me, specifically, deliberately. Which means someone knew, or guessed, that I would one day reach for it, a long, slow beat. Which means someone knew about you, Della, before tonight, before you ever fell down my stairs. Someone laid this shield in place and waited, knowing you would lead me to this man, and knowing I would try to wipe you from his memory, and choosing to stop me. The chamber went cold and silent around the words, because that was not how any of this was supposed to go. Cole Briggs was supposed to be the end of it, the final loose thread of her old, hunted life. Snip him, wipe him, send him stumbling back up into the rain with a clean, Della-shaped hole where the obsession used to be, and then she'd be free. For the first time in her whole life, truly free, with the protection of an immortal king, and nothing left chasing her up the stairs. Except the thread didn't snip. She'd reached for the loose end. And the loose end had pulled back. And the pull had come from somewhere far down in the dark. Somewhere she couldn't see, somewhere that had known her name long before she'd known any of this existed. Take him to the holding cells, Aurelian said to the guards, gently. He is no longer the danger in this room. He is a message someone left for us, and I would not damage a message before I have finished reading it. He turned back to Della as they hauled the babbling man out. Someone is moving pieces across a board I cannot see the edges of, and I am only now beginning to understand that one of those pieces is you. The weeks after that should have been the part where life got easier. They were not. The shield on Cole Briggs's mind sat in the middle of everything like a stone in a stream, and the water of her thoughts broke around it and would not let it go. Someone knew about you. Before tonight, the sentence followed her into the library, and into the kitchens, and into the great soft bed where she lay awake under the painted wheeling stars. So she started asking. Because she couldn't not. Because the not knowing was worse than anything the knowing could be. She found Aurelian late one night in his study, the cavern of crackling books. He was reading by candlelight, white hair loose around his shoulders, one long finger resting on a page in a language she couldn't even identify, looking like a portrait that had grown bored of its frame and climbed down to do some reading. I need to ask you something, Della said, from the doorway. And I need you to answer it like I'm a person who can handle the answer. Not like I'm something you have to protect from the truth. I've had enough of people protecting me from the truth. It's how I ended up knowing nothing about my own blood. He set the book down at once. I would not dream of handling you, he said. Ask. She came in, sat across from him in a chair that was older than the United States. My grandmother, she said. She knew, didn't she, about what's in my blood. About all of this, Aurelian was quiet. Which was, she was learning, his way of saying yes to a thing he didn't want to be the one to say. The shield on Cole Briggs's mind, she pressed. You said it was witch work. Old, deliberate, and the only person in my entire life who ever told me my blood was special was a little old woman who I buried 2 years ago, thinking she'd gone soft in the head at the end. Who I'd stopped really listening to. Who I let die thinking I thought she was crazy. Her voice cracked and she hated it for cracking, hated that her body kept betraying her in front of him. So tell me the truth. Straight. Was my grandmother one of you? One of them? A witch? I did not know your grandmother, Aurelian said. Carefully, but not gently. He'd heard her. He was giving her the straight thing she'd asked for. So I cannot tell you what she was, but I can tell you what the evidence says, plainly, and let you weigh it with your own hand. Will that do? Yes, Della said. That'll do. A white witch's line does not survive by accident, Aurelian said. He leaned forward in his ancient chair, elbows on his knees, his crimson eyes steady on hers. Understand what such blood is in the world I live in. To my kind, It is the most precious substance that exists. You have seen, firsthand, what one mouthful of it did to me. There are vampires older and crueler than I, who would burn a city to the ground for a vial of it. And to a dark witch, it is the one thing in all creation that can unmake her life's work. It is fear and treasure both. A line that carries it is hunted, Della, always. From every direction at once, so for it to survive, Della said slowly. For it to survive. Generation after generation, unnoticed, hidden inside a small ordinary life in a small ordinary city, someone hid it, deliberately. With enormous care and enormous knowledge, and almost certainly at enormous cost, he held her eyes. That is not the work of a confused old woman who has lost her grip on the world. That is the work of someone who understood exactly what she was protecting, and exactly what would come for it if it were ever found, and who spent her whole life and very likely her whole self making certain it never was. Della's eyes burned. She let them. She moved us, she said. The memory came up from somewhere deep, dislodged. When I was little, we moved all the time. New apartment, new city, new school, over and over, and I never had a friend long enough to keep one, and I always thought it was money. Landlords. Dad's debts catching up. I thought we were just poor and running from rent. She laughed, and it came out broken. I thought we were running from rent. Perhaps, Aurelian said. She was running from something with a great deal more patience than a landlord. She never told me, and there it was. The real thing. The thing underneath all the other things. The splinter she'd been circling for weeks. That's the part I can't. She spent her entire life protecting me, moving me, hiding me, and she never told me why. She let me think she was just a sad, confused old woman talking to her tea. She let me roll my eyes at her. She let me stop listening. The tears came now, properly, and she didn't fight them. I stopped listening to her, Aurelian, at the end. When she most needed someone to believe her, I just nodded along to be kind. The way you do with someone you've decided isn't really there anymore. And the whole time she was telling me the truth, the only truth that ever mattered. And she let me dismiss it, because telling me clearly would have put me in danger. So she chose to let her own granddaughter think she was crazy rather than risk my life with the truth. Aurelian didn't reach for her. She'd noticed that about him, and noticed it again now, with gratitude. He had learned somewhere in 700 years, or maybe just somewhere in the last few weeks of watching her, that not every grief wants to be touched. Some griefs want only to be witnessed, to have someone else in the room who will not flinch from them, and will not try to fix them, and will not rush them toward feeling better. So he sat with her. And he said nothing. And he let her cry for a grandmother she had failed to believe, in a chair older than her country, 100 feet beneath the rain, and when the worst of it had passed, when her breathing had steadied and the tears had run their course, he said one thing. Quietly, she gave you an ordinary life, he said, knowing what you carried, knowing what it would cost her to keep that life ordinary. She let you roll your eyes at her and dismiss her and bury her thinking her foolish, and she chose that, Della. Every day she chose it, because the alternative was a daughter who knew the truth and was hunted for it the way she had been hunted her whole life. She did not fail to tell you. She decided not to tell you. There is a world of difference between the two, and the difference is the whole measure of how much she loved you. Della wiped her face with the back of her hand. How do you know that? You said you didn't know her. I did not know her, he agreed. But I have spent 700 years watching what people do for the ones they love, and I know the shape of it when I see it. It looks exactly like a long, quiet, thankless life spent making sure someone you love never has to be afraid of the thing that frightened you most. He paused. I would have liked to meet her. The woman who hid a white witch's line in plain sight for a lifetime, and never once let the people hunting it catch even her scent. She must have been extraordinary. She made terrible tea, Della said with a wet laugh, genuinely awful, like dishwater with a leaf in it. Then she was extraordinary in some ways and human in others, Aurelian said. Which is, in my experience, the only kind of extraordinary that has ever been worth a damn. And Della laughed again, properly this time, the grief and the love and the absurdity of it all tangled together, sitting in an ancient chair beneath the earth, crying and laughing at once over a dead woman's terrible tea, while a vampire king who had not smiled in centuries watched her do it and looked, for just a moment, like something in him that had been frozen a very long time had started, quietly, to thaw. The first attack came on a Tuesday, or what Della thought was a Tuesday. Time had gone strange and soft on her down here. No sun to mark a morning, no dark to mark a night, Just the candles, which never went out and never burned down, and the slow tidal rhythm of a court that had stopped counting days in human-sized amounts a long, long time before she was born. She was in the library when it happened, reading about covens, because she'd decided that if witches were hunting her, the least she could do was understand what a coven actually was, instead of sitting in her beautiful cage waiting for the next things she didn't understand to come kill her. She'd found a book, old but readable. She had her feet tucked up under her in a chair the size of a rowboat. She was almost for a moment content, and then she felt it through the cord. Wrongness, not pain. Not at first. Urgency. A spike of it, sudden and sharp, coming down the thread from Aurelian's end of things, and underneath the urgency, the thing that made her drop the book and stand before she'd thought about standing, was fear. His fear. And his fear ran in only one direction. Toward her. She ran toward the great hall, and nearly collided with Brielle, coming the other way down the corridor at a speed that turned her into a streak of black and white, her beautiful face set hard as carved stone. Back to the king's chambers, Brielle ordered, catching Della by the shoulders, turning her around in a single motion. Now. Lock the doors from the inside. Do not open them for anyone until someone you trust with your life stands on the other side and you can see their face. What's happening? Drawn's coven. They have come, ice flooded Della's veins, head to heel. The witch, Vasilka Drawn. 300 years dead, by everyone's reckoning, and now her people, her coven, her line here, in the halls beneath the rain, come for the girl whose blood had undone 3 centuries of her revenge. They heard, Brielle said, already shoving Della back the way she'd come, toward the residential wing, toward safety. The curse is broken, and word travels in the dark faster than you would believe. They are not pleased. They have come to take back what your blood took from them. Go. Run. If you are harmed, the king will end me with his own hands, and I will not blame him for it. Go. And then a scream echoed down the great stone hall from somewhere ahead, high and inhuman and cut suddenly short, and Della stopped arguing and ran. She made it to the chambers. Threw the great doors shut, dropped the heavy iron bar into its cradle, with a clang that shook her teeth, pressed her back flat against the wood and slid down it to the floor, and sat there with her heart trying to climb out through her ribs. And through the cord, she felt him fighting. That was the terrible gift of the bond, the thing she would never have asked for and could not now give back. She couldn't see it. She was 100 yards and a dozen walls away. But she could feel all of it. His rage, white and total and focused to a single burning point. His body moving, she felt the impacts, distant and dull, like blows landing on a far wall. And underneath the rage and the violence, constant, never once flickering out even at the height of the fighting, his fear, not for himself. She understood that now, completely. He was 700 years old, and he had stopped fearing his own ending a long time ago. His fear was for her, the whole time. A king fighting for his life and the lives of his people against a coven, 3 centuries in the making, and the thing that frightened him, the only thing, was a girl sitting on the floor behind a barred door. Time crawled past on its hands and knees. She heard things she would never hear. Crashes that shook dust down from the ceiling, shouts in languages that predated English, the shattering of something enormous. A high keening sound that might have been magic and might have been someone dying. And once, terribly, a scream she half recognized, and she pressed her hand over her own mouth and prayed to a god she'd stopped believing in years ago that it didn't belong to anyone she'd started to care about. And then it stopped. The silence after was almost worse than the noise. It went on and on. She sat in it, rigid, every muscle locked, the iron bar still down, not moving, not breathing, waiting, and then footsteps. Coming closer, slow, heavy, and the cord flooded with something that was not fear anymore. Something warm and bone-deep and exhausted, and she was already pulling the bar up before the voice came through the door. Della, Aurelian. Wrecked. Alive. It's me. Open the door. It's over. She threw it open. He stood in the corridor covered in blood. Some of it, she understood with a lurch, was almost certainly his own. His white hair was matted dark with it. There was a long tear down one side of his black coat, and underneath it something that was already, impossibly, knitting closed. But he was standing. He was whole. He was here, it's over, he said again. For tonight. And Della heard the last 2 words land, and felt the cold settle back into her chest, and said the thing they both already knew. For tonight, she repeated. That's not the same as over. His silence told her she was exactly right. They drove the coven back. That night, and the next time, and the time after that, because there was a next time, and a time after that. Twice more across the following weeks the witches came, and each time it was different. Never the full breaking wave assault of that first Tuesday. Smaller, sharper. A handful of witches who struck hard and fast at one specific point in the palace's defenses, and then dissolved into smoke and shadow before the vampires could close on them and finish it. And something about that pattern gnawed at Aurelian. Della could feel it through the cord, even when his face stayed perfectly smooth in councils. A low, persistent unease, a man turning a puzzle over and over, and not liking the picture forming on the far side. "They are not trying to win," he said one night. They were in his study. He was staring into the fire that someone kept burning there, the only real fire in a palace full of candles, and the light moved across his face and made him look, for once, exactly as old as he was. An attack meant to win looks entirely different. It commits, it overwhelms, it accepts losses to seize the prize. This, he shook his head slowly. This commits to nothing. This bleeds away and watches. Then what is it? Della asked. If they're not trying to win, what are they trying to do? Measure. His jaw tightened. They are taking the measure of me, of my defenses, my responses, my reach. How fast I move when the alarm sounds. Which corridors I reinforce and which I leave thin. How many of my people I will commit to protect one human girl, and how that number changes from one attack to the next. He turned from the fire to look at her. Someone patient is behind this. Someone willing to spend lives, their own people's lives, simply to learn the shape of the board before they make their true move. And patience like that, Della. That is not grief. I know grief. Grief is loud. Grief throws itself screaming at the thing that wounded it. This is cold. This is a mind, not a heart. And a cold, patient mind is a far more frightening thing to face than a grieving one. Della sat with that, and came, slowly, to a decision that had been forming in her since the first Tuesday. Since the moment she'd slid down the back of a barred door and sat helpless on the floor while the people she cared about fought and bled for her. She was done being a girl behind a locked door. So she went to find Brielle. She found her where she'd known she would in the practice yards, the low stone chambers far below the residential wing where the vampires kept their bodies honed, even though their bodies, strictly speaking, didn't need it. Brielle was alone, working through a sequence of forms with a long, curved blade, and she moved so fast that the steel blurred into a single sheet of light, and the only sound was the soft cut of the air. "Teach me," Della said. Brielle didn't stop, didn't even look. "You're human," she said mid-form. "You will never match us. Not in 100 years of training, not in 1,000. Your kind is slow and soft and breakable. Go back upstairs. I'm not trying to match you," Della said. "I'm not stupid. I know what I am. I'm trying to not die the next time they get past the doors. There's going to be a next time, Brielle. You said it yourself, and I'm tired of sitting behind a bar, on the floor, listening to people bleed for me. Teach me enough to not just be a body you all have to protect. That's all I'm asking. Enough to stand up." That stopped her. Brielle came out of the form, lowered the blade. Turned, finally, and looked at Della with those pale eyes, and there was a long, measuring silence in which Della felt herself weighed on some ancient scale and waited to learn the result. "Pick up the wooden one," Brielle said at last. She nodded at a rack on the wall. "If you cry, we stop, and we do not start again. If you complain, we stop. If you quit even once, girl, we never begin again, and I tell the king you wasted my time. Do you understand the terms?" Della crossed to the rack, picked up the wooden one. "It was heavier than it looked. I understand," she said, and she did not cry, and she did not complain, and she did not quit. It hurt. It hurt in ways she hadn't known. Her body could hurt muscles she'd never met announcing themselves the next day. Bruises blooming up and down her arms in colors she didn't have names for. Her hands blistering, and then bleeding, and then, eventually, hardening. Brielle was merciless. Brielle corrected her grip 100 times, 1,000, the same correction over and over with a patience that was its own kind of brutality. And Della came back, every day, and picked up the wooden one, and stood up again. And somewhere in all of it, she found a thing she hadn't known she'd been starving for, because her whole life had been running. Running from her father's debts. Running from the men in the rain. Running from the truth her grandmother had buried so deep, Della had walked over it for 23 years without knowing. Her whole life had been one long flight from things bigger than her. And here, in a low stone room beneath the earth, for the first time, someone was teaching her how to turn around, how to plant her feet, how to face the thing instead of fleeing it. Her body got stronger. Then it got fast, not vampire fast, never that, but fast for a human, fast enough to surprise. And then, one afternoon, weeks in, Slick with sweat and shaking with exhaustion, she saw an opening she hadn't been taught to see. And she took it, and she landed a clean strike across Brielle's guard. The wooden blade cracking against the ancient vampire's ribs, Brielle went still, and then, slowly, that hard and beautiful face did something Della had never once seen it do. It smiled. A real one. Small and surprised and almost warm. Again, Brielle said. And Della understood, standing in that little room far under the rain, that she was not the girl who had climbed a chain-link fence 2 months ago. That girl had run, because running was the only thing she had. This one was learning, finally, how to stand. The thing about Brielle was that Della had started to like her, which was exactly why it took her so long to see it, because you don't look hard at the people you've decided to trust. You give them the benefit you'd never give a stranger. You round their sharp edges off. You fill their silences with the kindest explanation available, because the unkind one would mean you'd been a fool, and no one wants to be a fool. And Brielle had so many silences. The way she went very still whenever Aurelian and Della stood too close together. Whenever the king's hand found the small of Della's back. Whenever the cord did something visible to both of them at once. The way her pale eyes tracked Della across a room not with hunger. Della knew hunger by now, had learned to read it on a dozen faces, and this was not that. It was colder, more careful. The watchfulness of someone keeping a ledger. And the way she'd appeared in that corridor on the first Tuesday, so impossibly fast. Already running, already knowing exactly where Della was, and exactly where to take her. Like she'd been waiting for the alarm. Like she'd known it was coming. Della told herself it was nothing. Brielle was the king's right hand, his oldest friend, 5 centuries of loyalty. Of course she watched everything. That was the entire job. Until the night Della couldn't sleep, and went walking the lower passages to wear herself out, and heard voices coming up from a side tunnel, and recognized one of them. She didn't mean to listen, except she did. The instant she heard the second voice, low, male, gravelly, an accent she didn't recognize, and a tone that did not belong to anyone in the court, she pressed herself flat into a shadowed alcove and stopped breathing and listened with every nerve she had. Cannot continue, Brielle was saying, and her voice was strained in a way Della had never heard it. Every time they come, he risks more. He stands in the front rank now, do you understand? The king himself in the front rank, where any lucky stroke could end him. For her, a 700-year-old king, the last great king of the Western courts, throwing his immortal life into the path of witches' fire, again and again, for one human girl. It cannot go on, it will get him killed, then you know what must be done. The gravelly voice, patient, reasonable. You have always known, give us the girl, Brielle Cour. Quietly, a door left unbarred, a wrong turn, whispered in the dark. The attacks stop the moment we have her. The coven withdraws. The king is safe. The line endures another 1,000 years. One life weighed against all of that, a silence. And in that silence, Della's whole body turned to stone, because the silence was the worst thing she had ever heard. The silence wasn't a no. The silence wasn't outrage. The silence was a woman who had served a king for 500 years, standing in the dark, actually thinking about it. He would never forgive me, Brielle said finally, very quietly. If he ever learned it was my hand. He would never forgive me. Then he must never learn, the gravelly voice said. That is rather the point. Della never remembered deciding to move. She only found herself moving, stepping out of the alcove, out of the shadow, into the low torchlight of the passage, into the open. And the hooded figure that had been standing with Brielle melted backward into the dark the instant she appeared. Gone between one breath and the next, leaving only the 2 women facing each other. Brielle turned and saw her, and for one long, terrible heartbeat, neither of them said anything at all. How long, Della said. Her voice came out steady. She had no idea how. Her training, maybe? The wooden sword and the 100 corrections. Her body had learned how to hold still while everything in it screamed. How long have you been telling them where I am? Brielle did not deny it. That was the part that broke something in Della's chest. She didn't even try. No flinch, no excuse, no theater of innocence. Just a long, level, terrible silence, and then... You don't understand, Brielle said. Then make me understand. Della's hands had started to shake. She made them stop, the way Brielle herself had taught her to. Because from where I'm standing, the woman who's been teaching me how to defend myself has been selling me to the exact people I'm defending myself from. So make me understand. I'm listening. That's more than I ever gave my grandmother. Make me understand. And Brielle's composure cracked, finally, all at once, and what was underneath it was not malice at all. It was grief old and deep and worn down to the bone. The grief of someone who has loved one thing for so long they've forgotten how to love anything else. "Do you have the faintest idea what your blood means?" Brielle said. "Not to him. To all of them. To everyone. Every coven from here to the old world now knows there is a white witch's line walking the earth, breathing in his hall. They will never stop coming for it. Never. Not in your short human lifetime. Not in 100 years after your dust. As long as you live, you are not a girl, Della. You are a war. A permanent, endless war, parked in the middle of my king's life. And he will stand in front of you for every hour of it. Every single hour. Until one of those hours finally kills him." Her voice broke. "I have served him 500 years. I have bled for him on 3 continents. And I will not stand here and watch a barista with kind eyes get him killed by inches because he is too in love with her to step out of the fire." The word landed in the cold air between them and hung there, though neither of them had ever said it. Not Brielle, not Della, not Aurelian, not in all the careful nights and gentle silences and kitchen table conversations. And here it was, finally spoken aloud for the first time, and it was the woman who wanted Della dead who said it, like an accusation, like a diagnosis of a terminal disease. "You're wrong," Della said. "Am I not about him?" Della swallowed hard. "Maybe not about him, but about me. You're wrong about me being a war. I'm not a war, Brielle. I'm a person. A whole person. With a dead grandmother and a dead father and a future I'm only just starting to believe I get to have. And the only difference between you and the peoples in those hoods is that they don't know that. To them, I really am just blood in a bottle. But you know better. You taught me to hold a blade. You corrected my grip 1,000 times. You smiled when I finally got it right, and you didn't even mean to, and I saw it." Her voice shook and she let it shake. "You don't get to know me and sell me. You don't. The people in the hoods can do it because to them I'm not real. But you made me real to you on purpose, every single day in that practice room. So what you're doing isn't loyalty. It's just a kinder, slower kind of betrayal. And I think some part of you already knows that, or you wouldn't have needed the dark to do it in." Brielle's face did something complicated. Something that for half a second looked very much like shame. And then footsteps came down the passage. Fast. And torchlight swinging. And Aurelian's voice, because of course he'd felt it. The cord had carried Della's fear straight to him like a flare fired into the dark, calling her name, sharp with alarm. And Brielle looked at Della, and in that instant made a choice, in real time, right in front of her, that Della would spend a very long time afterward trying to read. "Say nothing," Brielle breathed, fast, low, urgent, not now, not yet. "Listen to me. If you accuse me now, tonight, with no proof but your word, against the word of his oldest and most trusted friend, you will tear his court in 2. Half will believe you, and half will not, and the half that does not will never trust the human girl who got Brielle Kaur executed on her word alone, and a court torn in half is precisely what they want. It is the whole purpose of the measuring." She held Della's eyes, and there was something naked in them now, something close to pleading. "Let me make this right. I don't yet know how, but let me try. Please." And Della, God help her. She would think later. God help her for the kind of person she'd always been said nothing. Because Aurelian rounded the corner. And his eyes went straight to her, raking over her, searching for wounds, for blood, for harm. And the cord between them was so flooded with his fear and his crushing relief. At finding her whole that Della could not, in that one moment with all of that pouring into her, bring herself to drive a knife into the middle of it. "What happened?" he demanded. His hands found her shoulders, her face. "I felt you. You were afraid. Truly afraid. What happened? Who was here?" Della looked at Brielle. Brielle looked back. Steady now, composed. A woman holding her own life in another woman's open hand, and knowing it and not looking away from it. "I got lost," Della said, "in the lower passages. I couldn't sleep. I came down here to walk, and I turned around and didn't recognize anything and startled myself half to death in the dark. That's all. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." Aurelian frowned. He didn't believe it. She could feel that he didn't believe it, could feel the doubt move through the cord like a cold current. But he also, mercifully, did not push. He simply pulled her into him and held her, and the relief in his arms was so total and so undefended that it made her chest ache with the size of the lie she was telling into his coat. And over his shoulder in the torchlight, Brielle mouthed 2 silent words. "Thank you." Della would carry that night a long way. She'd think about how simple it would have been to speak, how clean, how a harder woman, a smarter one, would have pointed and said traitor, and let the king and his 700 years sort out the rest. That woman would have been right to do it. That woman would have been safe, but Della had held a wooden sword while Brielle fixed her grip 100 times. And somewhere in those 100 small corrections, against every reasonable instinct, the two of them had become something almost like friends, and Della had spent her entire life being discarded by people who were supposed to love her, her father, who chose his debts over her again and again. Even her grandmother, who'd chosen silence. A long line of people who decided she was disposable. She was not, it turned out, willing to become one of them. Not even to someone who'd earned it. Not yet. And the strange thing, the thing she would only understand later, was that the mercy changed something. Because Brielle did not meet the hooded figure again. Whatever the gravelly voice offered, it went unanswered. And the training changed too. It stopped being a teacher humoring a girl she'd already written off as dead. It became something fiercer and more desperate, and more like love a soldier forging a comrade who might actually have to survive. Della felt the difference in every correction. She didn't have words for it, but she knew the shape of it when it arrived. Why, she asked Brielle once, mid-session, both of them breathing hard. Why did you stop? Talking to them. I know you did. Why? Brielle lowered her blade. Looked at her for a long moment. Because you held my life in your mouth, she said. And you swallowed it instead of spitting it out. Do you understand how rare that is? In 500 years, no one has done that for me. No one. She raised the blade again. Guard up. You still drop your left when you tire, and the thing that comes for you will not wait for you to rest. Again, and Della raised her guard, and neither of them ever spoke of the hooded figure again. But something had been decided in the dark between them, a debt of a different currency than blood. The kind you can only owe to someone who held the power to destroy you, and looked at you and chose not to. The package came 3 days later. A scout brought it up from the most recent failed attack, a pouch, stripped from the body of a witch who hadn't melted into smoke fast enough. Inside, ordinary things, dried herbs, a short curved knife, a folded cloth, and one thing that was not ordinary at all. A photograph. Ferellian laid it on the table in his study, and Della looked down at it, and the floor of the world went out from under her. It was old. Cracked white at the corners. The colors faded to soft browns and golds, the kind of old that meant film and chemicals, not pixels. And in it, 2 women stood smiling in front of a house Della had never seen, somewhere with tall grass and a fence and afternoon light. One of them was her grandmother, young. Decades younger than Della had ever known her, before the lines and the stoop and the soft confusion of the end. But unmistakable, the same eyes, the same stubborn set to the mouth, the same way of standing, like she was bracing against a wind no one else could feel. And the other woman? Della's voice failed completely. She tried again, and it came out as barely anything. Who is that? The other one. Who is she? Aurelian had gone very still, very old. That, he said quietly, is Vasilka Dran. The room tilted on its axis. No, Della said. No, that's not Vasilka died 300 years ago. You killed her. The curse, you said. I said I killed her daughter. And now his voice had changed entirely. Careful, slow. The voice of a man rereading a story he has known by heart for 3 centuries and finding, suddenly, that the ending has been changed while he wasn't looking. During the sundering, I killed a witch's daughter, and the witch, the mother, cursed me for it. For 300 years I have believed I knew which was which. The daughter I killed. The mother who cursed me. I never once questioned it. He reached out and touched the cracked edge of the photograph with one fingertip as if it might dissolve. But this is not 300 years old, Della. This is film. This is 40 years old, perhaps less. And here she stands. Vasilka Dran. Not dust. Not memory. Not a legend the coven carries forward in her name, which means she is alive. His crimson eyes lifted to Della's, and for the first time since the night she'd fallen down his stairs, she saw something close to true fear move through them. The witch I have feared and hunted and tried to outrun for 3 centuries is not a ghost. She is not a grandmother's cause taken up by angry descendants. She is alive, and she has been alive this entire time, hidden as carefully as you were hidden. And 40 years ago, he looked down again at the 2 young women smiling in the lost afternoon light. She stood in the sun beside your grandmother, close, at ease. Like family. Della couldn't breathe because the pieces were turning now, fast, too fast, falling into a shape she didn't want to see. Her grandmother, who'd hidden her, the bloodline she'd buried, the constant moving, the small, careful life, the truth too dangerous to speak aloud even to the granddaughter she was protecting. She hadn't been hiding Della from the world. She'd been hiding Della from one specific woman. A woman who had lost a child 300 years ago. A woman whose masterwork cursed Della's blood had just torn apart. A woman who, it now turned out, had once known Della's own family closely enough to stand beside her grandmother and smile for a camera in the sun. She knew my grandmother, Della whispered. Aurelian, why would the witch who cursed you know my grandmother? Why would they look like that? Like friends, like and Aurelian. 700 years old, who had an answer ready for nearly everything in the world, looked at the photograph of the two young women in the long ego light, and for once had none. I don't know, he said, but I think your grandmother spent her entire life making certain that you and I would never have to find out. He turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back. Faded pencil. A woman's hand, small and careful, the same hand Della had seen on 100 grocery lists and birthday cards across a childhood she'd thought was ordinary. Della leaned in to read it, and 4 words rearranged everything she thought she'd understood about who she was and where she came from, and why a woman she'd buried thinking her senile had spent every single day of her long life glancing over her shoulder at a door. 4 words, forgive me, both of you. And the 4 words would not let her go, forgive me, both of you. Both, not one, both. Because of forgiveness is the thing you beg from the people you have wronged, and her grandmother had begged it of 2 of Della and of Vasilka Drone, the witch who had cursed a king and hunted a bloodline across 3 centuries. What do you do, Della thought, lying awake under the painted stars? That needs forgiveness from your own granddaughter and your worst enemy at once? She found the answer in the last box. The box of her grandmother's things she had never once been able to open in the 2 years since the funeral. Urshin's people, it turned out, could fetch anything from anywhere, and so it came down to her, and she sat on the floor of the midnight silk room and opened it with shaking hands. Old photographs, a hairbrush with white hairs still caught in it, a pressed flower gone to brown dust, and a journal, not her grandmother's, her father's. Della had buried her father 6 months ago, hating him a little, the gambler, the borrower, the man who'd left her $10,000 of other men's anger and not one word of goodbye. She'd carried that hate like a stone in her shoe, small, constant, easy to forget she was even carrying. She opened the journal, and the stone turned to glass, because her father had not gambled the money. He had written it all down, page after page, the doctors, the specialists, the treatments insurance would not touch, the slow, ruinous, losing war against the thing eating her grandmother's mind from the inside because it had not been simple senility, the way Della had believed. It had been something with a longer and crueler name, and it had been killing her by inches, and it cost money, so much money. Money a desperate man with no good options left borrowed from very bad men. To buy his mother-in-law a few more months. To keep alive as long as he possibly could, the one person in the world who had spent her own whole life keeping Della safe. He never told Della. Of course, he never told her. Because telling her meant explaining why her grandmother was worth bankrupting a life and dying in debt for. And explaining that meant the truth, the bloodline, the witch, the danger, the whole buried thing. So he had let his daughter believe he was a weak man and a gambler. He had let her bury him with a stone in her shoe. Rather than hand her a truth that might get her killed, the last entry was the worst. The handwriting had gone bad near the end, the way a tired and frightened man's hand goes bad when he is running out of time. If she ever reads this, I hope she knows. I wasn't weak. I was just out of better ways to love them. Della wept on the floor of an underground palace for a father she had spent 6 months hating, and when she was done, she understood the photograph completely. Forgive me, both of you. Her grandmother had done something, long ago, to both her own family and to Vasilka Drone, something that had begun all of it. Something a dying woman wanted absolution for from both sides of a 300-year war. She did not yet know what, but she knew now what she came from. People who paid impossible prices, quietly, without thanks, to protect the ones they loved. Her grandmother, her father. Both of them spending everything they had so that Della could one day stand in a room like this, alive, with a choice in front of her. She was done running from that inheritance. She was going to be worthy of it. The last attack did not come like the others. The others had been measuring. This came like a dam breaking. She felt it through the cord before any alarm sounded a wave of wrongness, so vast it near the throat. Every candle in the palace guttered at once. The stone itself seemed to groan. An Aurelian's voice arrived in her head, not in words. The bond didn't speak in words, but in pure meaning. Sharp as a blade they are here, all of them, run. Except Della was done running. She took up the blade Brielle had given her, the real one, the steel one, the one she'd earned with blood and 100 corrections. And she ran toward the great hall instead of away from it. The great hall was chaos made visible. Vampires and witches locked together across the floor. Shadow magic writhing through the air like living, hunting things. The 1,000 floating candles scattered and wild, some snuffed to nothing, some flaring up huge and roaring. And at the center of all of it, riding a tide of darkness that bent the very light around her, a woman, white blonde hair, eyes like chips of river ice, beautiful in the terrible way that only the very old and very powerful are beautiful. Della had seen that face before 40 years younger, smiling in lost sunlight, standing beside her grandmother, Vasilka drawn. She saw Della across the burning hall, and she smiled. And the smile was almost gentle, which was the very worst thing about it. "There you are," Vasilka said. Her voice carried over the battle, soft and unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world. "The little healer who undid my masterwork. Do you know, child, you have your grandmother's eyes?" You knew her. Della's blade came up. Her hands did not shake. She had trained too long, too hard for them to shake. The photograph. 40 years ago, you knew her. You loved her. I loved her. Something moved across the witch's ancient face, grief, raw and bottomless, 3 centuries deep. Before any of this. Before the sundering. Before he, her ice eyes flicked to Aurelian, fighting his way across the hall toward Della, took my daughter from the world. Your grandmother and I were the last of the old healing lines. Sisters in everything but blood. And then she chose a side. His side. She took the gift in your veins and she hid it inside the very court that had murdered my child. She betrayed me to shelter you. The pieces turned. Fast. Final. That's what she needed forgiveness for, Della breathed. She didn't just hide me. She chose them over you. To save us, she betrayed you. She chose them over me, Vasilka said, and raised one hand, and the shadows gathered into it, coalescing into something solid and sharp and aimed at Della's heart. 300 years I have waited for the line that abandoned me to surface again. And here you stand, in his hall, wrapped in his protection. Exactly as she once stood, her voice cracked at last, the cold splitting open to show the grief beneath. You broke my curse, child. You took my last piece of justice out of the world. Let me see whether spilling your blood puts it back. The shadow flew, and Aurelian was there. He crossed the last of the hall in a blur, and his body was between Della and the dark before she could even flinch, and the shadow struck him instead. He grunted, staggered, did not fall. And he turned, and the gentle creature who asked about telephones across kitchen tables was gone, and in his place stood the thing the whole world had once learned to fear, the warrior, who had led armies through the sundering, crimson eyes blazing, fangs bared. You will not touch her, he snarled. Vasilka laughed, short and bitter. So protective. Tell me, vampire, was she worth breaking my greatest working? Was one human girl worth 300 years of my justice? Yes, Aurelian said. Simple, absolute, without a flicker of doubt, and he moved to kill her. And here is where the story he had lived for 700 years would have ended, the way all his stories ended, with his enemy dead at his feet, and another long century of silence stretching out ahead of him. Except Della saw something he could not. She saw a woman who had loved her grandmother. She saw 300 years of grief with nowhere to go but cruelty. She saw the exact shape of the thing that had cursed a king and hunted a child across centuries, and it was not evil. It was a mother who had never, not once in 300 years, been allowed to stop grieving her child. Stop, Della said, and Aurelian stopped, his hand inches from the witch's throat. Because the cord carried the command straight into him, and because in 700 years no one had ever told him to stop and meant it the way she meant it. Della, don't kill her. Della stepped forward. Into the space between the king and the witch. Into the single most dangerous place in the entire burning hall. Please, just listen to me. Both of you. Just listen. The hall went quiet. The fighting slowed and stilled across the floor. Vampires and witches alike, turning to stare at the human girl standing unarmed between 2 ancient powers, her blade now hanging loose at her side. Della looked at Vasilka. You loved her, she said, my grandmother. And she chose them over you. And you've carried that wound for 300 years. And I am not going to stand here and tell you it wasn't a real wound. It was. It is. I can see it on you. Her voice shook and she let it shake. But she carried it too, every day. Until the day she died, she left you a message. On the back of that photograph. Do you want to know what it said? Vasilka's ice eyes flickered. Just once. It said, forgive me, Della said. Both of you. She was asking me. And she was asking you. The last thing she did before her mind went was beg forgiveness from the granddaughter she lied to and the woman she betrayed. She spent her whole life hiding from you, and she died loving you anyway. Something cracked in the witch's face. 300 years of accumulated ice cracking down the middle. Your blood undid my curse, Vasilka whispered. It is the only thing in all the world that ever could have. If I let you live, I have nothing left. No justice. No daughter. No. You have a choice, Della said. Which is more than my grandmother got, or my father, or me until about 2 months ago. You can spend the next 300 years exactly the way you spent the last 300. Or you can let it end. Right here. Right now. With the granddaughter of the woman you loved standing in front of you, asking you to, and then Della did the thing that broke the cycle. She lowered her blade, bent, and set it down on the stone at her own feet. She stood unarmed in a hall full of monsters, in front of a witch who had just tried to kill her, beside a king who killed his enemies as easily as breathing, and she laid down her only weapon. I'm not going to spill your blood, she said. And I'm asking you not to spill mine. Not because either of us has to. Not because anyone won. But because somebody, finally, after 300 years, has to be the one who stops. And I've decided it's going to be me. Because I'm the only one in this room who never lost anyone to this war until tonight. So I get to be the one who ends it. The hall held its breath. Vasilka Drawn looked at the girl with her dead beloved's eyes, and the shadow in her raised hand trembled. And for a long, long moment, the oldest grief in that room hung balanced on a knife's edge, 3 centuries deciding which way to fall. The shadow fell apart. It dissolved into smoke, and the smoke into nothing, and the witch who had cursed a king and hunted a bloodline across 300 years lowered her empty hands, and her terrible, beautiful face crumpled, and she wept. For her daughter, for her sister. For all the long-wasted years she had poured into a hatred that had never once filled the hole the loss had left. She has her eyes, Vasilka said brokenly, to no one, to the burning candles, to the dead. Saskia's grandchild. With her eyes, and then she turned and walked the length of the great hall and out into the dark she had come from. And the witches went with her, melting back into shadow. And the war that had lasted 300 years ended, not with a death, but with a girl who refused to add one more to the count. It was Brielle who had died for her, in the first moments of it. Della only learned that after. It was the thing she would carry longest of all, because before Vasilka, before the choice, in the first chaos of the breaking dam, a witch's blade had come for Della's unguarded back. And Brielle Kaur, the woman who had stood in the dark and told a hooded figure that perhaps the girl should die for the good of the court, had thrown herself into its path. Della found her crumpled against a pillar, the dark magic burning through her in a way even 500-year-old flesh could not survive. You. Della dropped to her knees beside her. Why? You wanted me gone. You said I was a war. You said, I said a great many foolish things. Brielle's voice was already fading, going thin and far away. Her cold hand found Della's and gripped it. I told myself it was loyalty. For 500 years I have called everything loyalty. But you held my secret in your mouth, and you swallowed it when one word would have ended me. A stranger chose me. After 500 years, a faint, failing ghost of a smile, I could not let the only soul who ever truly trusted me die with my betrayal unanswered. So I answered it, the only way I had left. The cleanest debt I ever paid. Don't, Della said, the tears coming hot and fast. Don't you dare make this noble. Don't you dare. Aurelian Arlian, he was already there. On his knees on the other side, gathering Brielle's head into his hands. 5 centuries of friendship cradled between his palms. Old friend, he said, and his ancient voice broke clean in half. What have you done? The best thing I ever did for you, Brielle whispered. Her ice-pale eyes found Della one final time and held. She's worth it. She was always worth it. I was just too old and too afraid to let myself see it. Take care of him, girl. He is terrible at being taken care of. He will need someone stubborn, a breath. The last one. Guard up. You still drop your left. And then she was gone. Dust. The way they all went in the end, 500 years scattering soft as ash across the stone of the hall she had died defending. Aurelian knelt there a long time, holding nothing, and Della knelt beside him, holding his arm, and neither of them said a word, because some griefs are simply too large for words, and the only honest thing a person can do is kneel down inside them with someone else, and refuse to let them kneel there alone, after. When the dust had settled, and the dead were mourned, and the long, terrible night had finally given way to whatever passed, for mourning 100 feet beneath the rain, Aurelian took her hand. I gave up hope 300 years ago, he said quietly. I made my peace with it. I would die slowly, alone, in the dark, and that would be the whole of how it ended. And then a soaking, furious broke girl fell down my stairs and offered her blood to a stranger. He raised her hand, scarred now from 100 days, with a wooden sword, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. You saved my life that night. But that is the smallest thing you did. You gave me a reason to want one. And tonight you taught a 700-year-old king a thing he had somehow never learned in all those years, that an enemy can be ended by something other than death. In 7 centuries, it had never once occurred to me there was another way to finish a war. You showed me one in a single breath, with your blade on the ground. There's always another way, Della said. Her voice was raw. Somebody just has to be willing to be the first one to put the sword down. That's the whole secret. It's not strength. It's just being the first to stop. A year later, almost to the night he took her up, to the upper reaches of the palace, where it rose toward the surface and met a wall of thick, dark glass built to hold back the one thing in all the world that could still end him. The daylight he hadn't felt on his skin in 700 years. She had changed in that year, and the years it stood for. She had finished her degree medicine, every course taken from 100 feet underground, every exam proctored by a vampire who found human universities endlessly, helplessly amusing. She had begun to braid the old healing arts of her blood together with the new ones from her books into something neither had ever managed alone. She sat at his council table now, and the court had learned, slowly and then completely, to fall silent when she spoke. The terrified girl on the chain-link fence was still in her. Somewhere she would always be in there, but she had become the foundation now, not the whole house. On top of her, Della had built someone steady. Someone who could face a witch with a lowered blade and a father's journal and a friend's scattered ash and come through the whole of it still standing. They stood together behind the great dark glass, the king and the girl who had saved him, and they watched the sky begin to pale at the seam of the world. Do you ever regret it? He asked, quietly. Staying that night. When every sensible part of you was screaming to run back up the stairs into the rain, Della thought about it. The way she thought about everything now, honestly, all the way down. She thought about her grandmother who had hidden her so that one day she could stand somewhere like this and have a choice. She thought about her father, who had bankrupted his life and his name, buying time for the people he loved. She thought about Brielle, who had become dust so that Della could become this. She thought about a witch in the back of a burning hall, finally, after 300 years, setting her grief down on the floor like a weapon she was too tired to carry. Everything that had been spent. Every quiet, thankless, impossible price that had been paid by people who loved her so that she could stand here in the last safe dark before the dawn and choose. No, she said. She leaned into his side and his arm came around her, and the two of them stood there together as the first gold light of a sun he could never again touch came up over the rim of the world and poured itself out across the sky in rose and amber and white. Everyone's running from something. The whole world is running from something. I just got tired of running, a little earlier than most people do, and I stopped, and I turned around, and standing there in the rain was the thing that was finally worth holding still for. The curse was broken. The war was over. The grief, all of it, every ancient piece had finally found its shape and let itself go. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.